Jason worked at the local grocery store, stacking shelves and ringing up customers for barely above minimum wage. The paychecks were small, just enough to keep him in his tiny apartment and sometimes cover the needs of his younger sister Mia. They had each other, but the weight of living paycheck to paycheck often left Jason feeling anxious and worn out. He valued honesty and kindness, always wishing to make a difference for others, even when he struggled to take care of himself. One rainy afternoon, after a long shift, he noticed Mrs. Delaney, his elderly neighbor, sitting on her front porch, staring down at the ground. He remembered her fragile hands, often wrapped around a crumpled newspaper, and how she always seemed to be alone. The sight of her in such despair twisted Jason's heart. Without thinking much about his own tiredness, he decided to walk over. "Hey, Mrs. Delaney," he called, trying to muster a cheerful smile. "Do you need any help with anything?" She looked up, her eyes brightening a little at the sound of his voice. "Oh, Jason, you're so kind. I've been trying to reach a few things in the garden, but my knees, well, they don't like bending much these days." Jason couldn't say no. With a sigh that hid his weariness, he headed to her backyard. The weeds had taken over completely, and he remembered the time she had offered him fresh tomatoes in return for mowing her lawn. It felt good to help her again, and as he knelt down to pull the stubborn weeds, he thought about how tough life had been for them both. He worked quietly, the rain starting to drizzle around him, and soon the garden looked a bit brighter. Mrs. Delaney watched him work, occasionally sharing small stories from her youth, or a recipe for the tomatoes he'd once admired. With each story, Jason saw the layers of her life unfold, and for a moment, he forgot about his own struggles. After he finished, Mrs. Delaney thanked him wholeheartedly and insisted he take a few tomatoes home with him. "You've done so much for me, dear. Please, let me give you a little something in return," she said, her smile full of warmth. Jason hesitated, a knot tightening in his chest. "Oh no, I couldn't take anything. I'm just glad to help. Really." But she insisted, walking inside her home and returning with a small bag of ripe tomatoes. As he took it from her, he felt a strange mix of joy and guilt. "Thank you, Mrs. Delaney. I appreciate it," he managed to say as they exchanged heartfelt goodbyes. That evening, as Jason prepared a simple meal for himself and Mia, he couldn't shake the warm feeling in his chest. It was a small act, but it mattered. Navigating his own challenges made him grateful for every little thing, including the kindness he shared with others. It was these simple moments that kept him going, providing a glimmer of hope in the midst of uncertainty. But deep down he had no idea that this small act of kindness would lead him on a journey to discover something life-changing for both him and Mia. Weeks flowed by, and Jason's quick visits blossomed into a cherished afternoon routine. He would help Mrs. Delaney tend to her little garden, and she would regale him with stories over chilled iced tea as he took a welcome break. One sunny afternoon, as they sat beneath the warmth of the sun, Mrs. Delaney shared a piece of news that took him by surprise. "You know, Jason," she said, wiping her hands on her apron after a long session of pulling weeds, "I used to run a catering business a long time ago. It was quite successful until my husband fell ill. I just couldn't manage it alone anymore. There's something about working in the kitchen that really brought me joy." "Really?" Jason replied, intrigued as he leaned in. "I can't imagine you ever losing that spark, Mrs. D. You have a special gift. You're so creative." Mrs. Delaney chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling. "You're sweet to say that, dear. I have some friends at the community center who keep trying to nudge me to give it another go. It's just so hard to do it by yourself, I suppose." Jason mulled over her words for the rest of the day. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. He realized if anyone could help her revive that dream, it was him. He had a talent for organizing and a strong desire to learn more about catering and event planning. What if they could start small, maybe prepare meals for local community center events together? The idea swirled in his mind, taking shape over the following days. Finally, gathering his courage, he suggested it during one of their next gardening sessions. "Mrs. Delaney, how would you feel about hosting a small catering event for the community center? Just a little trial run to see if there's interest." Her face lit up instantly. That's not a bad idea at all, Jason. It could breathe some life back into this old heart of mine." With that spark of enthusiasm, they dove into planning crafting menus, sourcing fresh ingredients, and organizing the details of a small event. News traveled quickly through the community. The night of the event arrived, and they prepared a simple dinner featuring some of Mrs. Delaney's cherished recipes. The hall buzzed with eager guests, ready to enjoy home-cooked meals. By the end of the evening, compliments poured in, filling the air with excitement. Overcome with joy, Mrs. Delaney wrapped her arms around Jason tightly. "We did it, my dear. I can feel the spark again." In the weeks that followed, Mrs. Delaney began to receive call after call from local families and businesses wanting her services. It was heartwarming to see the relief wash over her as she realized that her catering business, although small, was making a comeback. Jason, too, felt invigorated by the teamwork and shared purpose they found in their new venture. However, life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges their way. One bright afternoon, just before Jason was set to meet Mrs. Delaney to finalize plans for their next big catering gig, he knocked on her door, excitement bubbling inside him. When no answer came, a twinge of worry crept in. Gently pushing the door open, he walked into the cozy living room, calling out her name. To his shock, Mrs. Delaney sat in her favorite armchair, her head bowed forward. Jason rushed over, heart pounding. He gave her a gentle shake, but there was no response. Panic surged as he called for help. It was too late. She had passed away peacefully, her old stories and bright spirit now silent. The loss struck Jason like a wave. He mourned deeply for his friend and for the dreams they shared. The local community united to honor her memory, sharing meals in her name, and Jason found himself cherishing the connection she had fostered. During the memorial service, he was taken aback when her lawyer approached him. "I understand you were very close to Mrs. Delaney," he said softly. "She spoke of you often and cherished the dream you shared of revitalizing her catering business." Jason nodded, grief still heavy in his heart. With a somber look, the lawyer continued, "She left a financial gift in her will specifically for you. A check for $25,000. The ground beneath Jason felt like it shifted. Why would she do that? "I didn't do anything for that. We were just friends." Mrs. Delaney had seen the kindness in him and believed in what he could achieve. The check was a token of the impact he had made in her life, as she left him an opportunity to carry on a piece of her legacy. For weeks, his mind ran in circles, flooded with confusion and sorrow. Instead of using the money right away, he contemplated what it truly meant to honor Mrs. Delaney. After some time, he decided to dedicate a portion of the money to restart the catering service they had begun together. He named it Delaney's Kitchen in her honor. Putting his energy into building a small team of local volunteers, he connected with people who loved Mrs. Delaney, nurturing the spirit of community that she embodied. By serving meals around town, he strengthened the bonds that had first grown from small acts of kindness. Business flourished quickly, thanks to word of mouth. As Jason took on more events, he felt her guiding spirit beside him every step of the way. He networked and formed partnerships with local businesses, creating a vibrant community that surrounded him. Each dish served held a piece of Mrs. Delaney's warmth and love. Months later, he stood at a bustling community fair promoting Delaney's Kitchen, chatting with friends and neighbors and sharing heartwarming stories, just like she had done. As he smiled at the joy the food brought, he realized that kindness not only brings temporary happiness, but can weave into something much greater over time. Through the ripple effects of their heartfelt acts, Jason not only discovered a renewed sense of purpose, he found the ability to support Mia and pay it forward in his community, honoring Mrs. Delaney each time a mission-accomplished plate was shared among friends. The sun bathed the small community fair in a warm glow as Jason stood behind a table adorned with a colorful spread of dishes. He watched as families gathered around, attracted by the mouth-watering aroma of the food he had prepared. The laughter and chatter filled the air, creating a lively atmosphere reminiscent of the joyful gatherings he had shared with Mrs. Delaney. As he served meals, Jason felt a deep sense of connection and belonging that had been missing from his life not long ago. This was more than just running a catering business, it was about continuing a legacy of kindness. Every smile he received reminded him of Mrs. Delaney and her unwavering belief in him. He was discovering that small acts of kindness truly mattered, not just to those he helped but also to himself. Jason. "The food is fantastic," shouted one of the community members, pulling him from his thoughts. A group of kids lined up, their faces smeared with sauce, their eyes shining with excitement as they eagerly filled their plates. Seeing their joy sparked a pride within him. "Thanks. I'm really glad you like it," he called back, grinning as he ladled a generous portion of pasta onto their plates. He was not just preparing meals, he was building a sense of community. As the day went on, Jason stole moments to reflect. His sister Mia helped him serve, and watching her laugh reminded him of why he worked so hard for their future. She had always been a big part of his life, and now, through the success of Delaney's kitchen, he finally felt he could give her the stability she deserved. When the fair came to a close, Jason gathered his team for a quick meeting. They had built an amazing network of supporters, and he wanted everyone to feel appreciated. "I couldn't have done this without all of you," Jason said, looking around at their faces glowing in the fading sunlight. "Your hard work has turned what we started into something incredible. Let's plan more events like this." The team nodded, feeling the excitement in the air. Plans began to take shape for community dinners, catering local events, and even classes to teach cooking to children. Jason felt invigorated. With every step they took, he knew they were honoring Mrs. Delaney's dream. In the weeks that followed, Delaney's kitchen flourished. They became known not just for good food, but for how they gave back to the community. Jason set up meal donation programs for families in need. Every week, they prepared food to distribute, and he encouraged local businesses to pitch in. Each time he saw families receiving those meals, it filled him with a profound sense of purpose. One evening, after a successful donation event, Mia walked into the kitchen as Jason cleaned up. "You're really doing amazing things here, you know that," she said with a warm smile. Jason looked up, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Thanks, Mia. I just want to make sure people feel supported, like Mrs. Delaney supported me." "She would be so proud," she said, nodding. Jason felt warmth spread in his heart. As time went on, the small catering business began to thrive. Jason worked long hours, but instead of feeling worn out, he felt more alive than ever. The community embraced him, inviting him to join local farmers markets and food festivals. In this bustling environment, he found himself growing more skilled and confident as a leader. One morning, Jason received an unexpected call from Mrs. Delaney's lawyer again, wanting to discuss her estate. He felt a swirl of emotions, recalling how he'd almost forgotten about the will and the financial gift. "This is regarding the funds from Mrs. Delaney's estate," the lawyer explained. "There's been a resolution regarding her assets, and she specifically requested they support community projects that promote kindness and care. I believe you are among the best candidates for this." Jason's heart raced. Could this truly be happening? The lawyer detailed how a small foundation was being formed to ensure Mrs. Delaney's legacy lived on. They wanted him to help manage it alongside the kitchen. "Imagine the impact you could make, Jason. This would allow you to extend the reach of what you're already doing," the lawyer encouraged. Excitement bubbled within him. "Absolutely, I'd love to be involved." With this new opportunity, Jason began to envision a brighter future. He could create scholarships for aspiring chefs, support community gardens, and fund cooking classes. The possibilities seemed endless. He called a meeting with his team to share the news. Joy bubbled up in laughter and hopeful discussions about the future, and Jason felt immensely grateful for how far they had come. As the months went by, the foundation began to take shape, and Delaney's kitchen stood strong at the heart of the community. With each initiative they launched, Jason felt his purpose grow deeper. One afternoon, while preparing for an event, he caught up with Mia. "You know, this beauty started with just a simple act of kindness. It's amazing to see how far we've come," he said with a reflective smile. Mia looked around the bustling kitchen, observing the joyous interactions among staff and the way the neighborhood felt vibrant and alive. "It's more than just food now. You've truly brought people together," she replied. Jason nodded, realizing how true that was. What started as a small gesture had blossomed into a movement centered around kindness and connection. That winter, they planned their very first community holiday dinner. Families came together to share meals, and Jason could see their smiles radiating with joy. He and Mia stood at the entrance, welcoming guests with warm smiles. As the evening progressed, he shared how Mrs. Delaney had touched their lives and encouraged everyone to continue her legacy of kindness. "Each of you holds the power to change someone's life with a small gesture," he said, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Let's build on her legacy together." As the crowd cheered, Jason took a step back and let it all wash over him. The laughter, the kindness, the love, it was everything he wanted to create. He realized his own life had transformed too. No longer struggling, he enjoyed financial stability and a sense of community that filled him with a profound appreciation. After the event, Jason walked home with Mia. "Can you believe this all started with helping Mrs. Delaney carry her groceries?" Mia grinned. "Sometimes it takes one moment to change everything, right?" He nodded. "Yeah. Her kindness has inspired so many. We should all keep looking for ways to spread that help around." Months turned into years, and the community thrived. Delaney's kitchen became a staple, providing meals along with hope and support. Jason felt an unshakable peace, knowing he was touching lives positively. One evening, as he reviewed the foundation's progress and the upcoming events with excitement, he reflected on his journey. Every act of kindness extended, every moment spent nurturing bonds, had brought him to this moment. Gratitude filled his heart. He understood now that kindness didn't only create a ripple effect, it could transform the trajectory of lives. Standing up, Jason looked around his kitchen filled with laughter and hard work. Delaney's kitchen was no longer just about food, it became a hub of connection, family, and above all, kindness leading to a transformed community. It was a living legacy, and Jason vowed to keep it alive for as long as he could.